à ce panel et présenter ce travail qui est très important, ces chiffres qui donnent et ces visages aussi qu'on peut voir sur la couverture du rapport et qui donnent une incarnation et de l'humanité à des situations et à des chiffres que l'on ne connaît pas assez. Ces chiffres qui ne sont que des minimums, mais vous en entendrez un peu plus parler dans l'intervention suivante. Je vais peut-être faire un focus sur la situation internationale. Hem, ce travail, c'est un travail mené par ECPM et Iran Human Rights depuis un certain nombre d'années. Depuis 14 ans, il me semble. Ce rapport est publié chaque année. Et ECPM et IHR sont tous les 2 membres d'Impact Terrain et mènent dans ce cadre diverses actions de plaidoyer. Nous participons au cycle de l'examen périodique universel. Nous soutenons le renouvellement du mandat du rapporteur spécial des Nations unies sur la situation des droits de l'homme en Iran et nous participons au dialogue avec les différents experts de l'ONU qui mettent en avant la situation de la peine de mort en Iran. C'est un travail de plaidoyer qui porte ses fruits, notamment au niveau des Nations unies. En témoignent un certain nombre d'éléments, les différentes prises de position des experts de l'ONU, et de la haute commissaire aux droits de l'homme, le renouvellement du mandat du rapporteur spécial Iran chaque année depuis 2011, l'augmentation du nombre de recommandations faites à l'Iran sur la question de la peine de mort dans le cadre de l'examen périodique universel. Lors du dernier examen périodique universel en décembre 2019, l'Iran a reçu 40 recommandations relatives à la peine de mort. Mais également la résolution sur les droits de l'homme en Iran votée chaque année à l'Assemblée générale de l'ONU. La résolution adoptée en décembre 2021 l'a été avec 78 voix en sa faveur. Et très récemment, un texte important à mentionner, c'est la résolution du Parlement européen adoptée en février dernier. C'est la première fois qu'on a un texte aussi fort qui demande à l'Union européenne et aux États européens de prioriser la question des droits de l'homme et notamment celle de la peine de mort dans les négociations entre l'Europe et l'Iran. Et cette résolution reprend un grand nombre de cas individuels que nous suivons et contient de nombreuses recommandations. Heu, les constats qui sont faits dans ce rapport, c'est une augmentation des exécutions, notamment lors des pourparlers autour des accords sur le nucléaire et lors des premières discussions entre 2013 et 2015, le nombre d'exécutions en Iran avait considérablement augmenté. Le même phénomène se reproduit avec la reprise des pourparlers au printemps 2021. On remarque aussi une forte augmentation des 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 exécutions post-présidentielles, alors qu'on peut observer un ralentissement avant les présidentielles. ECPM et IHR appellent la communauté internationale à faire des violations des droits de l'homme et ces obligations au titre de traité une priorité pour tous les pourparlers et négociations avec l'Iran. Et pour conclure, j'aimerais rappeler le fait qu'en décembre 2022, les États voteront à l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies la résolution pour un moratoire universel sur les exécutions. Nous appelons la communauté internationale à encourager l'Iran à s'abstenir ou à voter en faveur de ce texte et aussi signaler que se tiendra le 8e congrès mondial d'Ensemble contre la peine de mort et plusieurs thématiques du programme auront un lien avec la situation de la peine de mort en Iran, et pour être notamment la situation, les thématiques du type peine de mort et transparence, peine de mort, un outil politique et aussi une thématique très importante, quel soutien à la société civile dans les pays du Moyen-Orient. Voilà, je vous invite en tout cas à lire ce rapport. J'ai pour ma part été assez marquée par quelques récits, notamment une femme qui fait une crise cardiaque, en observant, d'autres hommes exécutés devant elle et qui sera malgré tout pendu sans vie ou ce jeune homme, qui est conduit, 6 fois, à la potence avant d'être, finalement, exécuté. Donc c'est vraiment une torture psychologique et vraiment ce rapport peut avoir un impact, sur les gens et renforcer notre action de plaidoyer Et un grand merci à tous les contributeurs de ce travail et notamment à Mathilde et à Julia de l'équipe CPM. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Aminata Niakate, ECPM President. Now I invite Mr. Mahmoud Amir Muqaddam to provide more details about the report. He has provided a presentation that you will be able to see on your screens. Please, the floor is yours, Mr. Amir Muqaddam. Your microphone is muted. Please open the microphone.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Ms. Aminata Nikate, for your statement. As it was mentioned, Iran Human Rights and ECPM have been publishing this report together in the last 11 years. I will guide you through this year's report that has been prepared mainly thanks to Iranian human rights defenders inside Iran, who have been taking tremendous risk to provide us with this information. As you know, in Iran, we do not have freedom of assembly, and no NGOs, independent NGOs, are not allowed. So providing information about the death penalty is regarded as a very serious crime. So these individuals who are working with us, who have been working with us so many years, they take a big risk to create awareness about what is happening in Iran. So I will share with you the presentation. I hope it works well now. Yes, so you can see the presentation.
It is not yet in the full presentation mode, so we can see the PowerPoint. Yeah, and it's now divided in two parts. So.
Right. Let me just try to make it. Sorry for the. Do you now see my shared?
And not at this moment, so we can see the participants list, but not yet the presentation.
Mm. Could you give me the possibility of sharing?
Yeah, you have it already.
Yeah, here it comes.
Yeah.
Sorry, there is a delay in.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Okay, we try once more and then.
Yes, please.
You see the presentation now?
Just in the basic mode, not yet in the preview mode.
Sorry, the view.
Yes, that's good now.
Perfect.
That's good now.
It's good now. Okay.
Yes, let's go
Sorry
on.
for the inconvenience. So as I mentioned, Iran human rights started in 2005 by human rights defenders inside and outside Iran, and abolition of the death penalty has always been one of our main goals, in addition to working to promote the rule of law and defending human rights defenders. We are also members of the steering committee of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty. And as it was mentioned, since 2011, we have been collaborating with the ECPM in publishing the annual reports. You can see the previous annual reports on our website or social media. So just to give you a short overview of this report, executions in 2021, we show that at least 333 people were executed in 2021. It's a 25% increase compared to 267 in the year before. And while rest of the world is going in the right direction, every year we hear about new countries either abolishing the death penalty by law or in practice, or joining the moratorium. Unfortunately, Islamic Republic of Iran is going in the wrong direction. The report also shows that more than 50% of the executions are based on murder charges, and about 38% for drug-related charges, which are not considered as the most serious crimes. As Ms. Nikate also mentioned, Islamic Republic of Iran, as one of the few countries in the world, continues execution of juvenile offenders. 2 juvenile offenders were executed in 2021 and 17 women. But I would like to excuse me for using numbers. When I say 333, we are talking about human beings, just like me and you, with families, and but we have to show these numbers. But just keep in mind that we are talking about human beings. And before going into the detail, I would also like to have your attention on the fact that in Iran, we do not have a due process. We do not have an independent judiciary. There is systematic use of torture to force confessions. And most of the time, almost in all death penalty cases, death sentences are issued based on the confessions extracted by the prisoner. There is lack of access to lawyer, at least in the investigation phase of after a person has been arrested, and the trials are unfair. So basically, the judiciary of the Islamic Republic can sentence anyone based on any charges to death if they wish so. So when I say that 55% were sentenced to death based on murder charges, these are charges that are in the court documents, but we have several examples where people have been sentenced to death for murder because they had to confess under torture. They had to confess to a murder they had not committed. So we should keep that in mind. The other thing is that the numbers that we are presenting, they are based on information from official sources, which includes official media and websites of the judiciary, and unofficial sources, which are family members, lawyers, sources in prisons, like other prisoners, other human rights groups. And these executions are not announced by the official media. We only include cases of unofficial or reports from unofficial sources if they are confirmed by two independent sources. So given the lack of transparency that we have in Iran, and also the risks that human rights defenders and those reporting on the death penalties are facing, we believe that the actual numbers are much higher. For instance, we have received reports of more than 40 executions that we have not included in this report because we couldn't confirm them by two independent sources. But if we look at the numbers that we have, out of these 333 that I mentioned who are included in this report, more than 83% are not announced by official sources. These are shown in yellow here, in orange here, and you see that only a minority, less than 20% of executions are announced. Another thing you see on this diagram, here you see the monthly executions, that there is a larger number of executions in the second half of the year. As you know, we had a presidential election around 19th of June 2021. And if we look at the number of executions before and after the presidential election, we see that there is a doubling of executions after presidential elections and election of Ebrahim Raeisi. Although the president is not involved in the judiciary, but it shows in what situation the Islamic Republic of Iran is. Death penalty is not used to fight crime because everybody knows that it is not deterrent, but it is used to spread fear among people. Another thing that has happened after the presidential election is the new round of the negotiations between Western countries and the Islamic Republic of Iran to renew the nuclear agreement. So while Iran has been in direct communication and negotiations with the West, number of executions have increased dramatically. If we look at the timing of these executions, you see in June, between 1st and 18th of June, we had one execution. Between 19th and 30th of June, we had almost one execution every day. And what happened in June, as I mentioned, on 19th of June, we had the presidential election. So although most of those who are executed are sentenced to death for not political offenses like murder and drug trafficking, but the timing of the execution has a meaningful correlation with the political events. For instance, in the weeks prior to the presidential election, at least the 2 weeks before the elections, there are no executions, and it happens every 4th year. And the reason for that, we believe, is one, the world is looking at Iran. There are foreign journalists traveling to Iran. And at the same time, Iranian authorities want to encourage people to participate in the elections. So the execution numbers go down. But right after the elections, you see that at the month of July, we had close to 2 executions every single day. So this is the timing of executions in Iran are very coordinated, and they are based on political events. When the authorities fear protests, the numbers go up again. If we look at the charges, as I mentioned, more than 50%.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just I found out that our journalists do not have access to chat box. So if We will have a Q&A session after Mr. Amir Muqaddam's presentation. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. I will give access to microphone after the presentation to you. And the full reports links in English and Persian and French will be pasted in the chat box. I'm very sorry, Mr. Amir Muqaddam, please continue.
No, thank you. Yes, so about the charges, as I mentioned, 55% are based on murder charges, 38% drug-related, and then we have 3% for charges such as rape, and 4% on vague charges, which we find in the Islamic Penal Code called muharebe, meaning waging war against God and corruption on earth and rebellion. I will come back to that. But if you look at the drug-related executions, at least 126 people were executed for such charges in 2021. This is Iran is the world's main executioner of for drug offenses. None of these executions were announced by the official media and official sources, and there is a overrepresentation of ethnic minorities, particularly the Baluch in southeastern Iran, among those who were executed for such charges. There were also 5 women among those who were executed. So behind these numbers, as I say, there are faces. I will show one of these faces, Ali Nehtani, a 30-year-old assistant bus driver on the Zahedan Mashhad route. He was arrested in 2019 and sentenced to death by the revolutionary courts. Here I can also say a little bit about the revolutionary courts. We had there are 2 kinds of courts that issue death sentences in Iran: the criminal courts and revolutionary courts. So drug-related offenses and security-related offenses, they are tried by the revolutionary courts. So these courts, in these courts, the judges have much more authority, and the lawlessness that we find and the arbitrariness that we find in the judicial system in Iran is even higher in the revolutionary courts. These courts are behind closed doors, and their aim is suppression. So it was mentioned that 126 people were executed for drug charges. This represents a 5-fold increase in number of drug-related executions compared to the previous 3 years. So from an average of between 20 and 30 executions in 2018 to 2020, we had 126 executions in 2021. And those of you who are not familiar with the background of this anti-narcotics law and the amendment to it, which is mentioned on this slide, in 2017, Iranian authorities they passed a law with the aim of reducing number of drug-related executions. The reason for this amendment, the main reason, was that United Nations Office for Drugs and Crimes, which has ongoing projects inside Iran to combat drug smuggling, and several European countries who actually cover the budget for these projects, and these include, they have included several Western European countries. They put pressure on Iranian authorities to do something with this high number of drug-related executions. Between 2010 and 2017, we had in average 330 executions for drug offenses every year. Almost one person every year was executed for these charges. So based on international pressure and also pressure from civil society groups and human rights organizations, the authorities passed this law, and that led to a significant decrease in number of drug-related executions. So from an average of one daily, it went down to about 25 executions in a year. Unfortunately, this trend is reversed without any changes in the law. As I mentioned, since we don't have due process, basically anyone can be sentenced for any charges to death. So unfortunately, this dramatic increase in number of drug-related executions has not been met with any official reactions from the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crimes, and modest reactions from European governments involved in anti-drug projects in Iran. So we hope that these reactions will come. However, the European Parliament has passed a very strong resolution. I hope that the European governments will follow it up. About the security-related charges, as I mentioned, Moharebe, waging war against God, corruption on earth, and back. These are vague charges very often used to sentence members of banned opposition groups to death. 8 people charged with such executed based on these charges were linked to dissident groups which are mainly in ethnic regions of Iran. So 9 of these 13 belong to the ethnic minorities. One of them was Haydar Ghorbani, a Kurdish prisoner. He was sentenced to death for membership in a Kurdish political party, Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran. And he was executed in December while judicial review was still pending in Supreme Court. His body was not returned to family, and in the death certificates, the cause of death is cited as unknown, although official Iranian media announced this execution. I also mentioned that 3% of people executed in Iran were based, their execution was based on rape and sexual assaults. One of them was Behzad Adl, whose picture you see here. The information that we have received shows that he was subjected to torture, including electric shocks, to give forced confessions. In the court, however, he denied all the charges. He was sentenced to death on charge of adultery by force. He was sentenced to 3 death sentences. And actually, he was executed 3 times. He was pulled up on the news 3 times, and his body left hanging for 2 hours in the prison. The whole process from arrest to execution took about 11 months. And the largest group of those who were executed is based on murder charges. You know, in Iran, based on Sharia, attempted murder is sentenced to retribution death penalty. So basically, the law says that the plaintiff, the family of the murder victim, they can decide whether they ask for retribution, which means death penalty, or blood money, or simply forgive. In 2021, 183 people were executed based on Qisas law. And among them, we find 2 juvenile offenders who were under 18 years of age at the time of the alleged offense, and 12 women. One of the ways of proving guilt in qisas cases, in murder cases, is kasame. It's an oath. Basically, 50 male members of the murder victim's family, they give an oath on the Holy Quran that they believe that person is guilty. So in 2021, 2 people were sentenced to death for murder charges based on kasame, where there was a ceremony. Mashallah Sabzi, the one on the top. There were 50 men who, some of them were not even the victim's family, and they were not, and they had not witnessed anything. They gave an oath that Mashallah was guilty, and he was sentenced to death and executed. He had also, there were also reports of torture and forced confessions. Ali Mardan Boland Gerami, he was sentenced also based on kasame for the murder of his wife. His wife died in her sleep while he was sleeping, and 50 male members of the wife's family who were not witness, they swore to his guilt, and he was executed. I mentioned that there were 2 juveniles among them. As you know, as I mentioned, Iran is one of the very, very few countries sentencing juvenile offenders to death. So these 2, one of them is Sajad Sanjari. He was 15 years old at the time of the alleged crime. Allegedly, he stabbed an older boy in self-defense against rape. That's what they say. So there is a law in Iran that was introduced in 2013, Article 91, where, which says that if somebody under 18 years of age commits a serious crime, it's the judge can ask for a review of whether the person is mature enough to be sentenced to death. So he was considered to have reached full mental maturity according to documentation based on the body hair development. He was executed secretly in Kermanshah. Family was not informed about the execution, and the reason why it was executed secretly is because they know that the international community is more sensitive to juvenile executions. Arman Abdul Ali, he was sentenced to death for murdering his girlfriend. The body were never found, and he said repeatedly in the court that he has not committed a murder. He was taken to gallows 7 times before the execution. Sometimes the execution stopped because of international reactions, and sometimes we don't know why they took him to the gallows and brought him back. This by itself was a severe torture. And about the women, these 17 women, 12 of them were sentenced to death for murder charges and 5 on drug-related charges. Of the 12 murder charges, 8 were convicted of killing their husbands. There were reports of domestic violence in several of these cases. Just to demonstrate the inhumane face of this qisas law, as I said, the authorities put the responsibility of the execution on the shoulders of the family of the murder victims. So people who already are victims of violence, they are giving the responsibility of committing a murder in the shape of an execution. Since 2010, 172 women have been executed in Iran. Iran is the world's largest executioner of women. One of these women, Zahra Ismaili, was charged with the murder of husband, who was a government official. There are reports of domestic violence, both against her and her children. The day she was taken to execution, at least 9 people were executed in front of her, and she suffered a heart attack. And then her lifeless body was hanged, and the execution was conducted by her own son and mother-in-law. In the death certificate, the cause of death is mentioned as heart attack. Another woman, Maryam Karimi, charged with murder of husband, together, that both she and her father were sentenced for the murder of her husband. Her execution was carried out by her own daughter on 13th of March. So, although I have said about more than 180 people executed for murder charges, and the authorities put the responsibility of choosing whether to execute or not on family of the murder victim, we see a trend in Iran in the recent years. Last year, the families of murder victims who didn't choose retribution death sentence, but they choose rather forgiveness or accepting blood money, these numbers were far higher than those who choose death sentence. So 705 cases of forgiveness we have registered. The actual number is probably higher. This is a trend that has been growing in the recent years in Iran. As you can see, 2021 had the highest number of the last at least 7 years. And it also fits with the a survey we together with the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty did. It was Gaman Association who did the survey for us, asking 20,000 Iranians inside Iran, what would you choose if a close member of your family was murdered? And about 70% answered that they would choose another punishment than qisas or retribution. So that's a new way of saying no to the death penalty in Iran. So finally, I will say a few words about the ethnic minorities. They are overrepresented in the execution numbers. However, in the ethnic regions of Iran, more than 90% of all executions are not announced. So actually, most probably the actual number of executions are much higher. And we mentioned about Baluch minorities. 70 Baluch prisoners were executed in 2021. They account for 21% of the total executions. According to the different sources, the Baluch population, they account for something between 1.5% to 5% of the population. So they are grossly overrepresented. Most of those executed were for drug-related charges, and many of the executions, they took place outside Baluchistan in other prisons. Now I have given you so many numbers about execution. There is, beside the forgiveness trend, there is one good positive development in 2021. For the first time since Iran Human Rights started monitoring the death penalty, we didn't have any public executions in Iran. So 2021, no public executions were reported. Although we know that the reason for reduction in the number of public executions in 2020 was COVID pandemic and the COVID restrictions. However, the fact that no public executions was implemented, we regard it as a very positive development. Unfortunately, it's not based on a political decision, and we know that authorities are preparing new public executions. However, we think that now we have an opportunity to stop public executions forever in Iran. As you know, Iran is one of the very few countries doing this, conducting executions in public spaces. So I think if the international community shows strong reactions, there are 3 planned public executions, at least the judges have ordered public executions. If we get strong enough reactions, this might not happen, because for the Iranian authorities, political cost is very important. So raising the political cost is important. At the very end, I will just show you some pictures of people who are at risk of execution. They are these 2 juveniles, Mustafa Emdadi and Hossein Shahbazi. We still can save them. There are some protesters at risk, people who were sentenced, either sentenced to death for participation in nationwide protests, or they are being tried. And I hope that international community get them engaged. And very, very at the end, dual nationals at risk. Ahmad Reza Jalali, Swedish-Iranian physician and scientist, he's on the death row. We hope that international pressure will not let Iranian authorities to do the execution. There are 2 other dual citizens, Jamshid Sharmat, a German-Iranian dissident. He was kidnapped in United Arab Emirates and currently on trial for charges that can give him death sentence. The same with Habib Shab, a Swedish-Iranian dissident kidnapped from Turkey. He can also be sentenced to death. I'm so sorry going over time. So I hope that we can have some discussion about how international community can help. And as Ms. Aminata Nikate mentioned, we believe that international community can play a very important role, and we hope that they use this opportunity. Thank you so much, and I will end my presentation here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahmoud Amir Muqaddam, Director of Iran Human Rights. I think we might be able to take 1, 2 questions. I can see Mrs. Azin Tajdini. Yes, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I just wanted to congratulate Iran Human Rights and ECPM for this really important and informative report, although also a report that paints quite a harrowing picture of the use of the death penalty in Iran. My question is on the increase of drug-related executions and whether it may be speculations, but what your perspective is on the reasons why such an increase has taken place, given the reductions that we observed between 2017 and 2020. Mr. Amiri Moqaddam already alluded to the rise in executions in general after the presidential elections, but I also would be curious to hear your views on potential other reasons for such an increase, and also any recommendations from that the international community could undertake in this regard. I should also say I'm a human rights officer at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So thank you very much again for this report and for the very interesting presentation.
Shall I answer?
Yes, please. And for the part of the recommendations also, I will ask Mrs. Niakata after you, please.
Yes. So thank you so much, Azin. So the reason for this increase, I think it could probably be more helpful to go back and look at the reason why the numbers decreased and why Iranian authorities actually changed the law, because for many years it was very evident that death penalty has not reduced the extent of drug trafficking or drug abuse, but Iranian authorities continued executions almost one every single day. So we believe that Iranian authorities do not use death penalty to combat a specific crime, but they do it to spread fear in the society. The numbers increase when they fear protests, and drug offenders, they are probably prisoners whose execution represents a very low political cost. They are mainly unknown. There are no campaigns to save them. They belong to the poorest part of the society, and because of strong international pressure from 2013 to 2015, especially, and in particular from United Nations Office for Drugs and Crimes and the European donors to the projects in Iran, Iranian authorities were almost forced to change this law. We know that no law can pass in Iran if the authorities they don't want it. The parliament doesn't have this power. However, after these 3 years, the need for increasing number of executions, of course, comes because of the nationwide protests. But I think the absence of strong international reactions have played a role here. The fact that United Nations Office for Drugs and Crimes has not mentioned this dramatic raise, I think it sends a wrong signal to Iranian authorities. So I believe that raising the political cost again by strong condemnation and strong reactions might be helpful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amir Muqaddam. Mrs. Niakate, let's hear from you regarding regarding what international community can do to or can react to the increase in the number of drug-related executions in Iran. The microphone is yours, please.
Merci beaucoup pour votre question. Alors, le rapport comporte un certain nombre de recommandations de manière générale adressées d'une part à la communauté internationale et d'autre part aux autorités iraniennes. Parmi ces recommandations, notamment à l'endroit de la communauté internationale, faire donc des violations des droits des humains et de ces obligations au titre des traités une priorité dans tous les pourparlers et négociations avec l'Iran à venir. Ça peut être un puissant levier peut-être pour infléchir le comportement des autorités iraniennes, soutenir le mandat du rapporteur spécial sur la situation des droits de l'homme en République islamique d'Iran, encourager l'Iran à ratifier la Convention internationale contre la torture et autres peines ou traitements cruels, inhumains ou dégradants, et le protocole facultatif. Envisager aussi de s'abstenir ou de voter en faveur de la résolution appelant à un moratoire universel sur l'application de la peine de mort. Voilà, encourager l'Iran tout simplement à respecter ses obligations internationales, à instaurer un moratoire sur l'application de la peine de mort et à s'engager dans un processus d'abolition. Plaider en faveur de réformes majeures du système judiciaire du pays, et notamment sur la question des drogues. Réduire le champ de la peine de mort peut être un premier pas pour parvenir à l'abolition universelle de la peine de mort, et notamment en Iran. Déterminer aussi le financement et la coopération bilatérale et internationale en vue d'obtenir des résultats manifestes en termes de respect des normes relatives aux droits humains et veiller à ce que tout programme d'investissement, de financement, de commerce, de coopération en Iran ne soit pas utilisé pour participer à des exécutions, les faciliter ou aider à les réaliser ou à toute autre violation du droit relatif aux droits humains. Voilà, le rapport comporte un certain nombre de recommandations en fin de rapport et je vous invite à le lire pour plus de détails.
Thank you very much, Aminata Niakate, President of ECPM, Together Against the Death Penalty. And thank you, Mahmoud Amir Muqaddam, Director of Iran Human Rights. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for the launch of the 14th Annual Report on the Death Penalty in Iran in 2021. The English and French section of the conference is now over. We'll be back shortly for the Persian section of the conference. You can find the full reports on ECPM website, ecpm.org, and Iran Human Rights website, iranhr.net, and their accounts on social media platforms. Please feel free to contact them for inquiries or comments. So we will say goodbye to our international viewers here and collectively hope for a world free of the death penalty. Thank you.